Hey everyone, don't forget to comment where you're watching from today. What you're about to witness is a story about how a simple request for $1 led to a moment that would change not just one life, but an entire community's perspective on compassion and second chances. The streets of Beverly Hills were unusually quiet that morning, the early December chill keeping most people indoors. Among the pristine sidewalks and luxury boutiques, Zachary Ford adjusted his worn military jacket, trying to preserve what little warmth it still provided. The former Marine had been living on these streets for 8 months, watching life's luxuries parade past him while he clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, anything helps." Piper Hale watched him from her small cafe across the street, one of the few independently owned businesses left in this upscale neighborhood. She'd been leaving coffee and day-old pastries out for Zach since she first noticed him sleeping in the alley behind her shop. Unlike others who tried to chase him away, she saw something in his eyes, a dignity that homelessness hadn't quite managed to erase. Officer Kevin Griffin did his usual morning patrol, nodding to Zach as he passed. He'd checked the veteran's background when he first appeared in the neighborhood: honorable discharge, 3 tours in Afghanistan, a story of PTSD, and a system that had failed him. Unlike some of his colleagues who saw the homeless as problems to be solved, Kevin recognized the thin line between security and desperation. Nora Quinn, a social worker who'd been trying to help Zach navigate the labyrinth of veteran services, was due to meet him that morning. She'd been making progress, slowly rebuilding his trust in a system that had let him down so many times before. The morning had started like any other, wealthy shoppers averting their eyes as they passed, cars worth more than most houses gleaming in the winter sun, and Zach trying to maintain his military bearing despite circumstances that would have broken most people. What no one knew was that this ordinary morning was about to become extraordinary. Mel Gibson had decided to do his Christmas shopping early, hoping to avoid the holiday crowds. The actor, known as much for his controversies as his achievements, was walking down the street, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, when he noticed something about the way Zach held himself. Zach hadn't been asking for money that morning. Experience had taught him that in Beverly Hills, dignity often earned more respect than desperation. But something about the approaching stranger made him break his own rule. Maybe it was the way the man walked, with purpose but without pretension, or maybe it was just instinct honed by years of reading people both in combat and on the streets. "Sir," Zach called out softly, his voice carrying the kind of respect that came from military training, "could you spare $1?" Piper, who had been about to bring Zach his morning coffee, paused in her doorway. She'd seen countless interactions between her homeless friend and passers-by, but something felt different about this one. Officer Griffin slowed his patrol car, watching with professional interest. In his experience, celebrity encounters with the homeless usually ended in either awkward charity or carefully crafted avoidance. But something about this scene made him stop and observe. Mel Gibson paused, looking at Zach with the kind of attention that came from decades of studying human nature for his craft. He noted the military bearing, the carefully maintained cleanliness despite obvious hardship, the way the veteran's request had been made with dignity rather than desperation. "$1?" Mel replied, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. "What's $1 going to do for you, friend?" Zach straightened slightly, an unconscious response to being addressed as "friend," rather than being ignored or pitted. "Buy a cup of coffee, sir. Sometimes that's enough to remind you you're still human." The words hung in the morning air, carrying more truth than any elaborate plea could have managed. Piper felt tears welling up. She'd been giving Zach free coffee for months, but she understood that sometimes the ability to buy your own cup meant more than any handout. Nora Quinn arrived at that moment, her case files clutched to her chest, watching the scene unfold with professional interest. In her years of social work, she'd learned that sometimes the most significant changes started with the smallest interactions. And there you have it, friends. Sometimes the most powerful moments start with the simplest requests. Have you ever had a small interaction that led to something extraordinary? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned, because what happens next will remind us all that true compassion isn't about the amount given, it's about seeing the humanity in those who've been forgotten by society. And sometimes, a request for $1 can lead to a change worth more than all the money in Beverly Hills. The Beverly Hills morning seemed to pause as Mel Gibson stood facing Zachary Ford, the simple request for $1 hanging in the air between them. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest interactions can lead to the most profound changes. "Tell me something," Mel said, moving closer to where Zach stood. "How long were you in the service?" His eyes had caught the subtle details. The way Zach stood, the precision with which he kept his small area organized, the military bearing that hardship hadn't erased. Piper Hale watched from her cafe doorway, the coffee she'd been about to bring Zach growing cold in her hands. She'd seen countless people interact with the homeless veteran over the months, but something about this encounter felt different. "3 tours in Afghanistan, sir," Zach replied, his voice carrying both pride and a hint of pain. "Force Recon Marine. Made it through the war just fine. It was coming home that proved harder." Officer Kevin Griffin had pulled his patrol car to the curb, ostensibly to monitor the situation, but in reality, captivated by the genuine interaction unfolding before him. In his years on the force, he'd seen celebrities perform acts of charity for the cameras, but this felt authentic, unscripted. Mel nodded, understanding showing in his eyes. "I played a lot of soldiers in my time," he said, "but I always knew I was just pretending. You lived it. That carries weight." Nora Quinn, the social worker, had opened her case file, but she wasn't reading it. Instead, she was watching a connection form between 2 men who, on the surface, couldn't have been more different, a homeless veteran and a Hollywood legend. "You directed movies about warriors," Zach said, a spark of animation entering his voice. "Braveheart, Hacksaw Ridge, they got something right about what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." A small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a respectful distance but drawn by the presence of a celebrity. What they witnessed wasn't a standard celebrity encounter, but something more meaningful. "Those movies," Mel replied, "they were about men who maintained their humanity in inhuman situations." "Sounds like you know something about that." He gestured to Zach's small area, noting how even his few possessions were arranged with military precision. Piper had seen Zach face all kinds of weather and hardship, but she'd never seen him cry until this moment, a single tear tracking down his weathered face as someone finally saw him not as a homeless person, but as a warrior who'd lost his way home. "$1," Mel continued, "that wasn't really about coffee, was it?" His voice was gentle, understanding. Sometimes asking for small help is harder than asking for big help. Takes more courage to maintain dignity in small things. Officer Griffin found himself thinking about all the times he'd passed Zach on patrol, exchanging nods but never really stopping to understand the man behind the circumstance. He wasn't alone. Other officers who regularly patrolled the area had gathered, watching the interaction with growing interest. "No, sir," Zach admitted, standing straighter. "$1, it was about being seen. About having someone look at you like you're still human, still worth something, even if it's just worth $1. Nora Quinn had been trying for months to get Zach to open up about his experiences, to trust the system enough to accept help. Now she watched as he spoke more freely to Mel Gibson in 10 minutes than he had to her in all their sessions combined. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the Beverly Hills sidewalk. The usual parade of luxury cars and wealthy shoppers had slowed, the normal rhythm of the street altered by the unusual scene unfolding. "You know what I learned making those movies about warriors?" Mel asked, his voice carrying to the growing crowd. "It's not the big battles that define us. It's the small moments of courage, choosing dignity over despair, humanity over hatred." Piper had finally set down the coffee she'd been holding, moved to tears by the interaction. She'd been right about Zach all along. There was something special about him, something that homelessness hadn't managed to break. "These folks," Mel gestured to Piper, Officer Griffin, and Nora Quinn, "they see it too. They see the warrior under the circumstances. But sometimes it takes another warrior to remind you who you really are." The crowd had grown larger, but instead of the usual celebrity-seeking enthusiasm, there was a hushed respect. Many were filming with their phones, but this wasn't about catching a celebrity sighting, it was about documenting a moment of genuine human connection. "When I came back," Zach said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it, "everything was too loud, too fast. The VA had their programs, but they didn't understand. How do you explain to someone that the hardest part isn't what you saw over there, it's what you can't see anymore over here? The purpose, the brotherhood, the sense that what you're doing matters. Mel's response showed why he'd been able to direct films that captured the warrior spirit so effectively. Purpose isn't just found on battlefields. Sometimes it's found in how we face our daily battles, how we maintain our honor even when the world stopped recognizing it. Officer Griffin had stepped out of his patrol car, understanding dawning on his face. He'd been treating the symptoms, making sure Zach wasn't disturbed, occasionally checking on his welfare, but he hadn't really seen the man behind the circumstances. Nora Quinn was frantically taking notes, but not about case numbers or program requirements. She was documenting a masterclass in human connection, in how to reach someone who'd lost trust in the system but not in themselves. $1, Mel said, reaching into his pocket. That's what you asked for. But we both know this isn't about money. He pulled out his wallet, but instead of cash, he removed a card, one that Zach recognized from his military days. That's a challenge coin, Zach said softly, recognizing the military tradition where commanders would present coins to soldiers who'd shown exceptional service or courage. Got it from a Marine commander when I was researching for a role, Mel explained. He told me to pass it on to someone who embodied the warrior spirit, not just in battle but in life. I've carried it for years, waiting for the right person. The morning had grown warmer, but the chill in Zach's bones had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with emotion as Mel pressed the coin into his hand. And there you have it, friends. Sometimes what looks like a simple request for spare change is really a warrior's last grasp at dignity, and sometimes those who seem most successful are the ones most able to recognize the hidden battles others are fighting. Have you ever had a moment where someone saw past your circumstances to recognize your true worth? Or have you been the one to look deeper and find the humanity in someone society had overlooked? Share your stories in the comments below. Stay tuned, because this encounter between a homeless veteran and a Hollywood legend is about to transform not just two lives, but an entire community's understanding of courage, dignity, and the true meaning of brotherhood. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful act of kindness isn't about money at all. It's about recognizing the warrior spirit that hardship hasn't managed to break. The challenge coin in Zachary Ford's hand seemed to carry the weight of all his struggles and hopes, a tangible reminder of who he was beneath the circumstances. Mel Gibson wasn't finished though. After presenting the coin, he turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding attention. You know what makes a warrior? It's not the battles they've won. It's the battles they keep fighting even when the world stopped watching. Piper Hale had finally stepped away from her cafe doorway, drawn into the circle of energy that had formed around the two men. She'd been right about Zach all along. There was something special about him that transcended his current situation. Sir, Zach said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes, this coin, it means more than money ever could. But why stop for just another homeless vet? Officer Kevin Griffin found himself moving closer, remembering all the veterans he'd encountered on his beats, wondering how many other warriors he'd passed without really seeing them. Because, Mel replied, I've played warriors in movies, told their stories on screen. But you lived it. And somewhere along the way, we as a society forgot that the battle doesn't end when you come home. Sometimes that's when the real fight begins. Nora Quinn watched as her client of many months stood straighter, seeming to shed years of invisible weight. She'd been trying to help him through the system, but maybe what he'd needed first was to be reminded of his own worth. The crowd had grown, but the usual celebrity excitement had been replaced by something more profound. People were putting their phones away, sensing that this wasn't a moment to be shared on social media, it was a moment to be witnessed and understood. You know what I see when I look at you? Mel continued, his voice carrying genuine respect. I see someone who hasn't given up. Your area is organized with military precision. You maintain your dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. That's not just survival, that's warrior spirit. Piper suddenly remembered all the mornings she'd watched Zach meticulously cleaning his small area, arranging his few possessions with careful attention to detail. She'd thought it was just habit, but now she understood. It was a soldier maintaining his post, even when the battlefield had become a Beverly Hills sidewalk. The hardest part, Zach admitted, his voice carrying years of unspoken pain, is feeling invisible. Not the cold or the hunger. Those are just physical challenges. But when people look through you, around you, anywhere but at you, that's what breaks something inside. Officer Griffin felt those words like a physical blow, remembering how many times he'd done exactly that, looked past the person to see only the problem. He wasn't alone. Other officers nearby showed similar recognition on their faces. Mel nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why you asked for $1, isn't it? Not for the money, but for the moment of human connection. The recognition that you're still here, still fighting, still worthy of being seen. A businessman in an expensive suit had stopped to listen, his own cup of designer coffee forgotten in his hand. Something about Zach's words had struck home. How many times had he walked past, avoiding eye contact, treating another human being as part of the urban landscape rather than a person with a story? In the Corps, Zach said, his military bearing becoming more evident as he spoke, we had a saying, leave no man behind. But sometimes coming home feels like being left behind. Like the world moved on and forgot there were still battles being fought right here on these streets. Nora Quinn was taking rapid notes, but not about case numbers or program requirements. She was documenting a breakthrough, the moment when a client stopped being a case file and became a person again, when dignity returned and with it, the possibility of real change. Here's what we're going to do, Mel said, his tone shifting from reflection to action. First, you're going to have breakfast with me at this lovely cafe. Then we're going to make some calls, not to charity organizations, but to people who understand what warriors need. Because sometimes the help that matters isn't a handout, it's a hand up from someone who respects what you've been through. Piper was already moving to prepare her best table, understanding that this wasn't just about serving breakfast, it was about restoring dignity one small gesture at a time. The morning sun had risen higher, casting different shadows now, as if the world itself had shifted on its axis. The usual Beverly Hills traffic continued, but around this small section of sidewalk, something extraordinary was happening. You still have your military ID? Mel asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Zach nodded, pulling out a carefully preserved identification card from an inner pocket. Never let it expire, he said quietly. Even when everything else was gone, couldn't let go of this. Reminded me who I was, who I still am underneath all this. Officer Griffin had pulled out his phone, not to record the moment, but to make calls of his own. He knew other officers who'd served, who'd understood the struggle of returning to civilian life. Maybe it was time to build bridges between those who'd made it back successfully and those still fighting their way home. The coin is symbolic, Mel explained to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the weight of understanding. But symbols matter. They remind us of who we are, who we can be again. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to remember how to believe in yourself. Piper had returned with coffee, not in paper cups, but in her best ceramic mugs. Sometimes dignity was found in the smallest details, in being treated not as a charity case but as a valued customer. You know what the hardest part of directing war movies is? Mel asked, though his eyes suggested this wasn't just casual conversation. It's not the battle scenes or the explosions. It's capturing the quiet moments, the ones where soldiers remember their humanity even in inhuman conditions. You've been living those moments every day on these streets. Zach's hand tightened around the challenge coin, feeling its weight, its meaning. In the Corps, they teach you about honor, courage, commitment. Never thought I'd have to prove those values on civilian streets, but maybe that's exactly what I've been doing, just didn't recognize it anymore. Nora Quinn watched as months of careful therapeutic groundwork suddenly found fertile soil. Sometimes healing couldn't begin until someone recognized and honored the strength it took to survive. The businessman who had stopped to listen had pulled out his own phone, but not to take photos. He was calling his office, canceling his morning meetings. Some moments demanded witness, demanded that comfortable lives be interrupted by uncomfortable truths. When I first saw you, Mel said, you know what caught my eye? Not the circumstances, not the sign. It was your bearing. Even here, even now, you carry yourself like a Marine. That's not just training, that's character. And character doesn't wash away with hardship, sometimes it's revealed by it. And there you have it, friends. Sometimes the most powerful acts of recognition aren't about seeing someone's current circumstances, but about seeing who they've been all along, who they still are beneath the layers of hardship and struggle. Have you ever had someone see past your circumstances to recognize your true worth? Or have you been the one to look deeper and find the strength in someone society had overlooked? Share your stories in the comments below. Stay tuned, because this story of $1, a challenge coin, and a moment of genuine recognition is about to transform not just one life, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to be a warrior, what it means to struggle, and what it means to truly see each other as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. 1 year after a simple request for $1 changed everything, Piper Hale's Cafe had become something more than just another Beverly Hills coffee shop. A new sign hung proudly by the door, "Warriors Rest, where every veteran is welcome." The small business had transformed into a sanctuary where former soldiers could find not just a hot meal, but understanding and respect. Zachary Ford stood behind the counter, now a partner in the business, his military precision evident in how he ran the operation. The challenge coin Mel Gibson had given him was framed on the wall, alongside dozens of others, each representing another veteran who had found their way back from the edge through the community that had formed here. "You know what makes this place special?" Mel asked, sitting at what had become his regular table during his frequent visits. "It's not just about feeding people or giving them jobs. It's about restoring dignity, one cup of coffee at a time." Officer Kevin Griffin had become a regular too, not just as a customer but as a liaison between the police department and the veteran community. The program he'd started, inspired by that morning a year ago, had transformed how the Beverly Hills Police Department interacted with homeless veterans. "Remember that first morning?" Zach asked, bringing Mel his usual coffee. "I asked for $1, thinking that small request might make someone see me as human. Never imagined it would lead to all this." Nora Quinn, who still kept her office in the cafe's back room, smiled as she reviewed her files. The success rate of her veteran cases had skyrocketed since Warriors Rest had opened. Something about the combination of dignity, community, and purpose had proven more effective than any traditional program. The cafe had become more than just a business, it was a model for how communities could help veterans transition back to civilian life. Former soldiers worked alongside civilian staff, sharing stories and skills, bridging the gap between military and civilian worlds. "The thing about warriors," Mel observed, watching the morning routine unfold, "is that they never really stop being warriors. They just need a new mission, a new way to serve. Sometimes that mission is as simple as showing others the way back from the darkness." Piper had expanded her original cafe into the adjacent storefront, creating a space where veterans could attend support groups, access resources, or simply find quiet company among those who understood. The walls were lined with military memorabilia, each piece donated by a veteran who had found their way here. "You sparked something that morning," Zach told Mel, taking a rare break to sit with his friend. "But it wasn't just about me. It was about showing everyone that sometimes the smallest gesture, even just truly seeing someone, can change everything." The businessman who had witnessed that first interaction had become one of the cafe's biggest supporters, creating a foundation that helped replicate the Warriors Rest model in other cities. He'd learned that real change didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it just required recognizing the humanity in others. "You know what's really remarkable?" Officer Griffin said, joining them at the table. "It's not just the veterans we're helping. It's how this place has changed the whole community's perspective. People don't look away anymore when they see someone struggling. They remember what they learned here, that everyone has a story worth hearing." The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the challenge coins on the wall and making them shine. Each one represented a story of return, of redemption, of warriors finding their way back to themselves. "The coin you gave me," Zach reflected, "it wasn't just about the military tradition. It was about recognition, about someone seeing the warrior still standing beneath the circumstances. That's what we try to do here every day. Nora had discovered that traditional therapy worked better when combined with the practical support and community understanding found at Warriors Rest. Her clients weren't just statistics anymore, they were members of a community that understood and valued them. You know what makes a great story? Mel asked, his filmmaker's eye taking in the scene. It's not just the dramatic moments. It's the quiet victories. Watching someone stand a little straighter, smile a little easier, remember who they are beneath the weight of their struggles. The cafe had become a meeting point between two worlds, civilian and military, where understanding flowed both ways. Veterans found their way back to civilian life while civilians learned about service, sacrifice, and the ongoing battles some warriors faced after coming home. We've helped 37 veterans off the streets this year, Piper shared proudly. But more importantly, we've helped hundreds remember their worth, their strength, their identity as warriors. The morning crowd began to filter in, a mix of veterans and civilians, all greeting each other with genuine warmth. The invisible barriers that often separated these groups had dissolved in this space, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. That's what I love about this place, Mel observed. It's not about charity, it's about brotherhood. About warriors helping warriors while reminding civilians that some of our greatest heroes are fighting battles right here on our streets. A young veteran entered, looking as lost as Zach had been that morning a year ago. The response was immediate and instinctive. Zach moved to greet him, other veterans turned to welcome him, and the entire cafe seemed to shift to embrace another warrior finding his way home. See that? Mel said softly. That's why this works. Every veteran who finds their way back becomes a guide for others. The chain of healing never ends, it just grows stronger with each link. Officer Griffin watched as Zach introduced the newcomer to the community, remembering how many similar scenes he'd witnessed over the past year. We've had 0 confrontations with homeless veterans since this place opened, he noted. Turns out respect works better than enforcement every time. The challenge coins continued to catch the light, each one a testament to a warrior's journey home. But it wasn't just about the coins anymore, it was about the community they represented, the understanding they symbolized. You know what the best part is? Zach asked, watching the cafe fill with its morning crowd. Every person who walks through that door learns something. Veterans learn they're not forgotten. Civilians learn that warriors don't stop being warriors just because they're not in uniform anymore. Piper had started keeping a journal of the stories she witnessed, tales of recovery, redemption, and return. Sometimes, she said, the biggest journeys start with the smallest steps, like asking for $1 or really seeing someone who's asking. And there you have it, friends. A story that began with a simple request for $1 transformed not just one life, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to be a warrior, what it means to struggle, and what it means to find your way back home. Have you ever been part of a community that transformed lives? Have you witnessed the power of recognition and respect to heal wounds that seemed unhealable? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the smallest gestures, really seeing someone, honoring their dignity, recognizing their worth, can spark changes that ripple out beyond anything we could imagine. Because in the end, we're all warriors fighting our own battles. And sometimes all it takes to win is knowing we're not fighting alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the moments that remind us that true heroes walk among us every day, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen not on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when one human being truly sees another,